Okay. Well, it looks like as we get more people rolling in, we'll kind of kick this thing off just to keep it on time. But hello, welcome. For anybody that I haven't spoken with or met yet, my name is Chris Juno. I'm the membership chair with the Sports Performance Enhancement SIG, and kind of the co-creator along with Shelby Miller and Scott to what this whole casual chats on serious stuff, and the design to just get good people together, talk shop, and kind of do it in a casual format. And so we happen to have an outstanding guest. And if you had a chance to read his background, I'm not going to read that thing because it'll take me about 30 minutes to do so. Been around for a while, done some pretty awesome stuff. Rob, if you want to take it away for a second, introduce yourself, and let everybody know, a little bit about your background and how you kind of got to where you are.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for spending the time on an evening. We could be doing other things. I want to thank Chris and Scott, because all your posts, you're very complimentary of me, and all I am is just someone like the rest of you, just trying to do the best they can. So I'm a physical therapist, athletic trainer, and strength coach. I've been in rehab for 40 years, and I've been training athletes for over 35. And I started a little physical therapy company with two other guys 21 years ago. We were 1,600 square feet in a little shopping mall in Queens, New York. And now we're 185 facilities in 5 states with a 20,000 square foot performance center. And my interest has always been strength and conditioning and rehab, and eventually getting into either the principles or exercises of strength and conditioning and rehab. Because if you think about it, we all have an affinity for sports physical therapy. If the fastest, strongest, most powerful athletes in the world use certain principles and exercises, well, we're all fairly intelligent professionals. We can take those principles and those exercises, and if we need to modify them, then we do so. We bring them into the clinic. And so that's really been my interest. I've been anything from a CEO to a strength coach to, whatever. So, so I appreciate being on.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome, Rob. So you're telling us we should have bought stock in your company, apparently.
No, I don't know about that.
Could have made some money. Well, well, thanks again, Rob. We're super excited to have you. And I want to kick this thing off with a conversation that you and I had kind of casually about a week ago. And we were kind of talking about where this whole thing was going to head. And you said, one of my big things is about load and clinicians, and how there's seems to be a bit of an epidemic with underloading individuals from a rehab setting. And so I want to dive into that a little bit, expand on that a bit more, and maybe kind of, is that something recent? Do you feel like this is something within the last 5 years? Has this been around the whole, for our career, or what's been going on?
I think it's been our career, and I think it's like anything else. I'll give you an example. We have a residency program. I'm very academic, and we have a residency program. And our first year residents came in. We had a young woman who presented a case for us and went over her her diagnosis, her exam, her plan, her goals, her review of the literature, and everything was right spot on. And I sat there and looked at myself. I just thought to myself, my God, I was this green day one too. And so I think that, as you go through experiences in life, right, or in your whether it's social life, family life, professional life, you gain more confidence, right? I'm a big believer that, confidence is achieved by one thing, and that's demonstrated ability. You can't buy it. You can't wish for it, right? You can't do anything else. It's like a team. If a team wins 2, 3, 4 games in a row, then they believe they can win. And so as you go through your experiences and have demonstrated abilities, then you get more confidence in your abilities themselves. And so that's what I think it is. I'm not trying to be negative to anyone, but I just think as you gain more confidence, then you also gain confidence in techniques, including loading. And the way I look at loading is this: the strength and conditioning and adapting it is that it was taught to me by a guy, a sprint coach no longer with us, named Charlie Francis, is that there's a concept that's easy to understand but it's hard to trust, especially in the rehab setting when you're working with post-op people. And that 90% or 90% of someone's 1RM or someone's ability is still submaximal. What's dangerous is how often, the volume, how often you apply that heavy load, right? But something that's submaximal is not dangerous as long as it's applied appropriately. And so 95 or 90% of someone's ability could be 1 pound on a straight leg raise, day one post-op, or it could be, 450 pounds in a squat in an athlete training in the performance environment. And so you need to load for adaptation to take place, because there's no such thing as a safe load, right? The way to adapt is to apply an unaccustomed stress. And so if something's unaccustomed, there's going to have an influence of danger, or for lack of a better word. And so that's where the art of what we do comes in. If everything we're going to do is particularly easy, then it's very unlikely for adaptation to take place, because it's something that the patient or the athlete's accustomed to repetitively over time. So there's a gentleman who's an endocrinologist from the 40s and the 50s named Hans Selye. He's a Hungarian endocrinologist, and he has this thing, that's where we got the gas system from. And so what happens is that when you apply an unaccustomed stress, like your first all-nighter, like when someone breaks up with you when you're in high school for the first time, right? When you have an unaccustomed stress, your body reacts and says, what the hell was that? And it rebounds. It takes you from a level of homeostasis down, and then there's an alarm, right? There's a rebound effect, but that rebound effect takes you past the line of homeostasis to what's called supercompensation. So the next time someone breaks up with you, the next time you have to pull an all-nighter, or the next time you're challenged with a weight or a speed, your body's better prepared to handle that task or that challenge. And so it's just called the gas principle, general adaptation syndrome, in regards to homeostasis in the body. And that's the same way with rehab or training, because a lot of rehab is exercise, right? So yeah, if I'm getting long-winded here, that's how I look at it.
No, that's perfect. I mean, that's a beautiful analogy and kind of entry point into this whole conversation, which is people still get better in physical therapy, despite our shortcomings in load progression, load prescription, load dosage. I think it comes down to a question of, what are we talking about? Load can mean a lot of things. And so what are we failing? Are we failing in too heavy? Is it not often enough? Is it not fast enough? I mean, what do you think, or is it all of that, Rob? I mean, is there a specific facet of load or stress that we're failing?
To me, there's intensity and there's programming, right? So intensity is load, meaning a weight, could be velocity, speed, could be distance. What is, the total volume of, I said on one post, I was being a little facetious, like, you don't train for a marathon by running a marathon every day, right? That would overtrain somebody. So it's accumulative. Stresses have to be accumulative to get to your goal. So it could be distances, it could be velocity, it could be a weight, it could be a jump height. Those are intensities to me. And then you have programming. How much, how often, etc. That's the talent, because if there was absolutes, we'd all be doing the same thing and everybody would be getting better. And we wouldn't be having, the results that we get frustrated about. And so, what we do, and everybody I think would agree, is science and art. And the art part is the talent, right? So, and that goes back to what I said before, with loading with regards to intensity, however you want to define intensity, that is also a factor of experience, which is a factor of demonstrated ability.
Yeah, do you think some of it too, and you alluded to this, do you think it's fear? Do you think that we as clinicians, as medical practitioners, right, dealing with a world that has this really nebulous, really nondescript phenomena called pain, do you think that undermines our ability at all to to be more of a strength coach? Do you think that's what's the problem here? Is we don't want to make people hurt. We're too afraid of pushing the envelope because there is the potential, like you said, right? It's got to be somewhat destructive, right? I say this to athletes a lot: is you don't you get stronger when you rest, right? You got to do some damage first, and then your body compensates over time. The rest is where you get better, but you got to do something to make it change. And so, are we too fearful? You think is that some of?
I think in some cases, yeah, because but that's being smart too. I don't know if it's fearful or smart. If you're not confident in the ability to apply strenuous intensities, then you shouldn't, right? So is that fearful? Is that being smart? I guess maybe it could be both. From what you just described, to me, that's work capacity. The ability to repetitively perform exercise over time, whether it's a day, a week, a month, or the whole rehab cycle, without inducing excessive fatigue, not just fatigue, but excessive fatigue, so that you can recover fully, so that you can perform optimally the next rehab session. That's work capacity to me. If you don't have sufficient work capacity, then essentially you're entering your next rehab session or your next training session with a half a tank of gas. How far are you going to go? So I agree with you.
And so from an academic, from an academic standpoint, Rob, I know you're obviously heavily involved in the residency and a mentor for a variety of people. What are some things? What are some ideas? What are some domains that you push in? So with the young lady that you were speaking about earlier that came in and presented her case, and right, where do you start? Where's the entry point for some of these individuals that, again, having seen a certain number of clients, is it just reps to say, I know this person based on kind of my heuristics that they can tolerate X, Y, and Z? Or is there a kind of a program you put them on, or what?
Yeah, with our company, we have we call it essentials curriculum, and then we have a residency, and the essentials is required, the residency is optional, and I think it's both. It's a factor of knowledge and skill proficiency, and so people have to do their reading and their work, and then they need a mentor side by side to teach them the ropes. Experience plays a role, as I said. You have the 10,000 hour rule, right? But how come sometimes freshmen start? So that maybe they're a little more, they didn't need the 10,000 hours, right? And so everybody's different, and you've got to be able to work with a person based on their abilities. And it's a factor, again, of knowledge proficiency and skill proficiency together, the scientific evidence in conjunction with the art.
So does that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what we do. So we have knowledge, we have lecture, we have study, we have all that, and then we have mentorships, and then we also and one-on-one mentorships, and then we also have lab sessions. And so we're trying to combine both. And I think the unique thing of what we are doing is that we're also focusing that on our outcome studies. And so if our outcome studies are getting better, then we know our educational process is probably right on or going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. If our outcomes aren't getting any better, then we've got to really evaluate our educational system that we're utilizing to teach our clinicians. So we tie everything with outcomes as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. You and I had a conversation about that the other day as well. I think there is no question that there is a renaissance in PT land for sure, and in kind of this devotion to learning load progressions and strength and conditioning, at least some fundamental concepts of strength and conditioning. I can speak for myself, and then obviously for the people here that are interested, there is definitely more information now on these topics than there ever has been, at least, since I've been out of school. And so it makes me wonder if that's the direction we need to head. And we're really focusing on learning these things, but there's really not a lot outside of what I'm hearing you say about how we're monitoring effectiveness of this education. How do we know that people are getting better at strength and conditioning? Are patients getting better? I guess, how do you monitor that? This outcome base is probably the first I've heard of something like that.
Well, first of all, the outcomes that we're getting, we use a company called Photo. So it's an independent auditor. And the reason why we went with Photo is because they have the highest database of patients, right? And so we can compare ourselves, like the East Coast to the West Coast. We can compare. They will not give you names, which I wouldn't want. They compare our company to another company. They can compare one clinic within our company to another clinic within our company, and then to a clinician. And so that's why we went with them. And we've done a lot of custom work with them that we utilize. So how do you know? So you started with photo, and then you hit what their landmarks are with regards to effectiveness and efficiency. And so can you surpass the national averages? That's where you start. And then once you establish your averages, how do you improve upon your averages? I could tell you this, that, we always talk about ACLs, right? Everybody rehabs them. We've been doing a study for the last 5 years, and the reason why we haven't written the papers, because I'm lazy right now and busy on other things. But we had a physician come to us and said, look, my re-tear rates are the same exact re-tear rates that is documented in the literature. Can we come up with a more strenuous testing or something and relate that to therapy and see how it goes? Well, we have tested over 300 athletes. Some we've rehabbed, some we haven't. This doctor actually sends us people out of state just to test. And I can tell you this, with regards to return to play, it's our numbers, that we see are probably the numbers that are documented nationally. And the two things that we are finding is that people aren't strong enough. So again, this is where we're not loading. And because they're not strong enough, I think that's a contribution, right? Because we said before, demonstrated ability, right? They don't react well to the ground surface area. They can't apply adequate amounts of force for propulsion, whether it's vertical, linear, or whatever it may be. And they can't react to the ground's forces coming back upon them. So deceleration, those types of things. And then they have compensatory patterns that everybody's aware of, right? And so I think that, whether it's kinesiophobia, which I do believe plays a big role, and the data and the science will support that, the more confident you could get someone earlier in the rehab, then later on, the more apt they are with the ability to not only apply force, but accept force, the reactive forces. And so how do you get them more confident? They have to load. They can't be afraid to load. And so, and we've been doing it all along, right? You put somebody in a leg press, you're loading them. You have somebody do a straight, we're doing it all along. So when someone asks me, well, how do you progress the squat, or how do you progress this? It's the same way I would progress a straight leg raise, or the same way I'd progress a leg press, or whatever else we teach people to do. It's a progression of loading. How do you feel? What's the reaction? What's important to me is what do they feel like the next day, right? Because sometimes New Year's resolution, you're going to lose 10 pounds. You go to the gym on January 2nd. You have a great day, great workout. You wake up January 3rd, you can't move, right? So I'm also interested in the day. So, as I'm going on here, those are the types of things, that's how I think about it. I don't, whether I'm right or wrong, that's how I think about it.
Well, but that brings up, obviously a ton to unpack and all of that. That's some really, really interesting. I don't think at this point, specifically everybody in this room for sure is going to know that there are no question some variables that relate to kinesiophobia, the IKDC, ACLRs. There are subjective scores that have very strong implications towards somebody's return to play and their quality of return to play.
Right.
We have good data to support that, right? But it's interesting when we talk about these metrics, we speak about things about the psychogenic implications of an injury, how you got injured, fear associated with movement in a certain way. But we very rarely, I love the fact that you're going back into this load bucket, right? Like the way we get through this is load them up into these capacities. Whereas I don't know that we think that way when somebody is fearful. I think the profession is a bit reserved at times. And to your point, is that undermining our capacity ultimately to get them to that level? Because at the end of the day, the forces that they're going to be exposed to on a field are well beyond what we're going to show them in our rehab facilities, right?
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. If they can't tolerate the stresses that we apply in a controlled environment, how are they going to tolerate the stresses on the playing field, which is an environment of chaos? They're not. And so we're better off loading them in a controlled environment. And if you do it systematically through an appropriate progression, you're likely not going to hurt them. Weightlifting in the general population, right? Weightlifters, not general population, but weightlifting athletes, it's a very low injury rate in the weight room. It's lower than on the field of play. So again, as long as you have some type of systematic progression, if you have someone who has the ability to lift 10 pounds, you're not going to give them 100 pounds in an attempt, right? You might try 15 pounds on a progression or something like that. And so it's the same as any exercise. I just think you have to have, a program design, a progression to check and balances. And the other thing I'll say is this: before you load, and if you haven't figured out by now, he's a good friend and a mentor. I'm very big on Vermeil's hierarchy because it's just so simple. It makes, think about this. So we've adapted in rehab, and our adaptation has included muscle reeducation and mobility and movement, right? So if I'm able to assume the exercise position, right, and my muscles are firing again, like I eliminate arthrogenic inhibition of the quad, now I can perform the exercise and load, right? I'm not just going to load them right off the bat. There's got to be some prerequisites along with work capacity. And if you look at the work of Lauren Chu, and we want to talk about quads, exercise, like we talk about the squat, depth is more important than load for EMG activity. And Kevin Wilk has shown that. A lot of people have shown that depth is very important. Now, as long as there's no contraindication, osteochondral lesion,
sure,
posterior horn meniscal tear, whatever, then we've got to get the person to perform the exercise with technical proficiency, no weight shift away from the surgical side, appropriate exercise depth with their body weight. Now we load. And what do we load? Do we load with 400 pounds day one? Of course not. Maybe you just give them the bar. And then you have to decide how do you want to load. Do you want to load from the bottom up, more of a trap bar deadlift scenario? Or do you want to load them from the top down, squatting? Well, it depends on, the athlete, what you want to teach them, the clinician, the skills of the clinician. There are no absolutes here, but there's various ways to load.
Well, there's two things I want to ask about that, because that's a really good point, Rob. Is we want answers about the progression of load, but we often don't reflect on the person distributing that load. We want to know what's the hierarchy and the chain of command of getting somebody to squat with heavy load, right? But we don't talk about how comfortable the clinician is about teaching that, educating that, about dosing that. I think we overlook that quite a bit, and we just assume that everybody's at the same level, and that's not true at all. If you're not somebody that has been involved in weight training your entire life, that may be a different entry point than somebody that hasn't been that way and may not feel as comfortable about that. So they may want a more constrained squat because it helps them navigate those waters a little bit more readily. And then the other thought I had too, and this is more of a question for you, is how are we monitoring that? How do you monitor that? So if anybody's not familiar with Vermeil's hierarchy, please go look it up. It's fantastic. It's simple. It's incredibly effective in giving you a framework. It's a macroscopic view. But how do we know when we're graduating through each rung of that triangle? Rob, like from strength on?
Okay, so I believe, all right, that, like, for instance, with our ACL, you can teach exercises in every aspect of the hierarchy, right? And I believe that's good for preparation. But you've got to place your emphasis on the physical quality, or maybe it's work, whatever it is that is most necessary at that time. So for instance, let's say we're going to work on a strength, or we're going to squat, all right? Well, Our people body weight squat as soon as they start getting in and out of a chair, right? Post-op. So we've got to eliminate the weight shift. Then we've got to go to depth. Then we've got to go through bottom up or top down. Then we've got to coordinate this with the healing continuum, right? Because we don't want to stress tissue prematurely, all right, or overstress tissue prematurely. So we combine the hierarchy with a healing continuum model, right? Reaction, regeneration, remodeling, okay? And so by 6 weeks, you're pretty much healed. 6 to 8, healed is healed. So at about 6 to 8 weeks, our athletes start doing mid-thigh pulls. But at 0 to 4 weeks, they're doing isometric mid-thigh pulls. So we go from isometric mid-thigh pulls to pulls, and then about 10 weeks, now they start catching the barbell, so we get an eccentric component of it. But what can I do eccentrically to prepare for catching of the bar? Maybe at 6 weeks, I can start doing kettlebell swings because of the deceleration of the kettlebell going down. So you have to have a progression. So my emphasis would be on strength, but I'm still teaching them from pulls to catching to whatever, the Olympic lift, right? Mm-hmm. And then when it comes time where I think they have sufficient strength levels, then I could keep those strength levels or try to increase them slightly. But now my emphasis is gone to explosive strength in the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And the way I go back to this is that if you look at a 100-meter dash, all right, the ability to come out of the blocks is dependent upon strength qualities, right? You're coming from a dead start. Then as you accelerate, well, that's velocity, right? And velocity with strength is power. Then you'll get to the point in velocity where the body is upright and you're actually rebounding from the ground versus applying manual mechanical force. That's elastic, that's plyometric, right? And then you hit top speed. If you look at that 100 meters in reverse, well, you can't hit top speed unless you optimally develop elastic abilities. You can't be optimally elastic until you're optimally powerful, and you can't be optimally powerful until you're optimally strong. That's the hierarchy. That's why strength's the foundation. Now, we know you get elastic in that 100-meter dash when you approach 7 meters a second, about 15 and a half, 16 miles an hour. If your athlete can't run that fast, they need to develop more power and strength. But it doesn't mean I don't work on plyos. Where's my emphasis? Then when they hit 15, 16 miles an hour, then I know I can continue with more plyo and more speed abilities. Though you're working everything within the hierarchy, where you're placing your emphasis. That's the talent.
I mean, so again, no, it does. I mean, you make it sound so simple, Rob. If you just want to just come hop into my head and then I'll get everybody better and we'll all be fast runners. I mean, it sounds like that's
we don't get everybody better. That's the problem.
That's right.
We don't.
Well, so what we're going to do, Rob, is we're going to break out into small groups and we're going to come back together. But I'm going to leave everybody with a question that you and I spoke about last time. So anybody that's not familiar, Rob has a specialty area, not just in ACLs and knees, but also does quite a bit in shoulder and elbow. And so my question, Rob, is going to be for you, but don't answer it yet. Don't spoil the surprise here. Is should we treat the shoulder, the rotator cuff, or the elbow, should we treat it the same as a knee? Does it have the same fundamental qualities as loading tolerance, loading stresses? Should we make it big, right? Should we go down that Vermeil's hierarchy with your shoulder, or is this just a lower body thing that we should be abiding by? Because I think there's probably some argument out in clinical land about that, whether we should load that structure. So yes, so and I apologize to my group, I got totally cut off. So I was in the middle of like such a good discussion point too, and I got booted. So anyway, so Rob, what do you think, man? Should we treat the shoulder like the knee? Is heavy load needed for that tissue as well?
Yeah, yes, but the principles are the principles. Can you hear me? Because I just said something with mute. Can you hear me?
No. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So the principles are the principles, right? It's just, it's like how many muscles to the eye versus how many muscles to the total lower extremity, right? And so you've got to work scapula, and you've got to work glenohumeral, right? And so when you want to speak about the cuff, we need good stability for good mobility. And so the principles are the same. We know that the cuff, its main function is stability, right? It's that deltoid rotator cuff force couple. Well, why can't we load it? Because in pitching, we have 1 times body weight going through the glenohumeral joint, give or take, right? So if I have somebody lift, when appropriate, 1 times body weight over their head, that's dangerous. Why? As long as I prepare them through a progression to get there. So I think what you have to be real careful with cuffs is with volume. And I was saying to the group I was with, I used to work at the hospital for special surgery for a number of years. I did a lot of research there, and that's why I feel like I got my academic background or my interest in academics. And there was a study we did in the 90s that was reproduced. And it looked at normal rotator cuffs and fatigued them to the point where it was excessively fatigued. So the Reader's Digest story is they had them lift scaption in supine on an x-ray table, a 5-pound weight, till they couldn't do 3 reps in a row, and then they x-rayed the, okay? And they had them elevate their arm overhead. And they found that the humeral head superior migrated in the same way as someone with a torn cuff, due to the effect of excessive fatigue. And not only do you have excessive superior migration, you have excessive inferior migration if you hold something with excessive fatigue of the cuff. So my thing with cuff is you got to watch your volumes. And so, you may start with the traditional 3 sets of 10, right? But if you want to increase weight, like where's the absolute? Everything has to be sets of 10. We know about hypertrophy and stuff with sets of 10, but maybe your first day of increasing loads is 3 sets of 5, and then you progress from there, that workout. Because you're only doing 15 reps, but the quality of your reps is great, and you're not going to induce this excessive fatigue on a small muscle group. And then eventually you've got to get to the point where obviously everything is working together from the ground up, the way we function, right? Whether we're running, pitching, throwing, whatever it may be. And so, that's how I look at it. The other thing I'll tell you is that we bench press our people, but we don't do a lot of it, and we don't do a lot of incline bench press, and I'll tell you why. So we had an Olympic, very successful, multiple gold medal Olympic weightlifter tore his rotator cuff. And what he was going to do a jerk, he blew his humeral head through his cuff. That's how explosive this guy was. So he flew to the States to have his surgery, all right? And one of my partners rehabbed him while we were at special surgery, and then he flew home. And the doctor was amazed how pristine his joint was. No arthritis, nothing, with literally hundreds of thousands of tons of weight and repetitions through his career. Then there was another gold medalist wrestler from the United States that tore his cuff wrestling, and he was a big Olympic lifter. And when they went in, did his cuff, his joint was pristine. So then we started to look at things. We said, okay, when you start doing the cuffs, look at people who work out and find out who has arthritis and who doesn't. This is truly empirical. This is not scientific in any way. This is an observation. But we found our thought process is this. You're taught in school, you have normal glenohumeral range of motion, right? 2 to 1. And McHugh and his group years ago in the 80s, right, they said when you start to lift something heavy overhead, that increases to 4.5 to 1. So you got to be, because that makes sense. You need that scapula to be stable to lift the heavy weight overhead. But when you're laying on a bench, you're pinning the scapula against the thorax with both your body weight and the weight of the barbell. So you disrupt that glenohumeral rhythm of the scapula due to compressive forces, which provide stability. And everybody who is a big time bench presser, though their ages may have been in the 30s, so I'll give them a little bit, all had evidence of arthritis when they had their rotator cuff repair. Now, I can't tell you that's scientific and that it's definitive. It's an observation in a number of people. So we prefer to have our people lift weights overhead because the scapula are free to move when it's feasible through a progression than do a ton of bench pressing. So again, how you want to work the cuff, we work the cuff like everybody else does. And then you've got to take it through a progression from people being on their feet, transferring forces from the weight up. The other thing we do with cuffs, especially with throwers, is a big eccentric component. You're gonna cringe when I tell you this, but we've been doing this for 30 years, and I published it in a strength and conditioning journal back in like 91, 92. We do something called arm whip. Okay, so what you do is you put somebody. Again, they have to be prepared for this, but I've never heard anybody doing this because it's a progression. You put somebody in a position, kneel on the ground, like almost like they're a holder in football, and their arms up over their head. And just the same way they would catch a plyo ball over their shoulder, well, that's too slow a speed. So you take your hand, you put one hand on their wrist and one hand on the back of their elbow, and you literally start to throw the arm, and they go through a D2 extension pattern across their body, mimicking follow-through and pitching. And you start slow, and eventually you increase the velocity. And we'll never mimic the velocity of pitching, but that velocity for eccentrics is a hell of a lot higher than catching a plyo ball over your shoulder. So again, we need eccentrics to produce tension, right? Eccentrics produce the most tension at higher velocities, not higher loads. And so that's how we address deceleration in throwers. So if you know the science, you could be creative. And again, we go back art and science. So, yep. I'm rambling here,
No. The problem is we're going to run. We could literally do this for the next 3 hours, and like the music's coming on saying, Chris, we can't do this forever. So I've got to yield the floor. I mean, Rob, we could have you on here for the next, like I said. So what I want to do is, that was fantastic. I want to open it up so that we can at least get some Q&A. I've got a million questions, but I want others to have a chance. So, Scott, I can't see the chat window because I have it on my phone. So if
that's all right.
or please, okay,
yeah.
Or unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. So Susanna says, how do you space out the high load days within the week to get optimal adaptation? My experience is 3 days apart, but I'm not sure if that is optimal. And yeah, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat and I'll read them, or you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, there's no absolutes, right? So 3 days a week. So the way we work 3 days a week is that if you took your total volume for the week, 42% of the work would happen on Monday because we assumed you're rested from the weekend, which may not always be the case, especially in young athletes. About 24% of the work would be done on Wednesday, and about 32% of the work would be done on Friday. And so what happens? If they truly rested on the weekend, they could have their heaviest day in both volume and intensity on Monday because they had 2 days rest. Wednesday is recovery. It's what Chris talked about before, right? You're doing enough work to recover, right, from that heavy workout. And you'll make gains from the recovery. And then Friday is kind of almost like your maintenance day. Maybe you'll make small gains. Then they got 2 days rest, and bang, you're back to Monday, and you load them heavy again, whether it's volume, whether it's intensity, whatever it is. And that's your wave: heavy, low, medium. So that's the actual breakdown of percentages if you want to figure out, I want to do this many repetitions in a week, which is a whole nother story. But so yes, that's how I do the wave: heavy Monday, light Wednesday, medium Friday. Here's the kicker you're going to get in rehab. Your patient's going to say, I'm paying for this. I made a copay. Why am I doing less work on Wednesday than I did on Monday? We're not doing enough. And so Wednesday, you're going to do a lot more manual skills. All right? You'll figure it out.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, that's awesome, Rob. Next up.
I would ask a quick follow-up to that, Rob. So with that idea, that's definitely when we start butting against peak training volumes that are tolerated. When we're dealing with somebody early on in the session where their work capacity is insufficient to stimulate something that would require that kind of a fluctuation, how do you modify your volume of each session at that point?
Yeah. So essentially, when you're beginning with someone, especially a surgical patient, right? I go back to DeLorme. All right. I'm just a simple guy. And so we start with 3 sets of 10, and my 3 sets of 10 may progress to 4 sets of 8 and 5 sets of 6. Over time, I still performing give or take 30 reps, but my repetition per set has decreased. And so since my repetition per set has decreased, my loads per set can go up. So even though my exercise volume has remained consistent for a period of time, the quality of each repetition has gone up. And that's how I avoid inducing excessive fatigue, because the quality of the work increased, not the amount of work. So you just play with it like that. Now they could do 5 sets of 6, then you may say, okay, I generally don't do more than 35 reps in an exercise. So now it's a factor of how many exercises do I want to do? And not every day it's 35 reps. And so you just play with it like that. So coming out of the blocks, 3 sets of 10, keep your 30 reps, increase the weight, lower the reps per set.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, again, that could open up a whole nother box of discussion about, you know, the concept of 3 sets of 10 and why it has nothing to do with the 3 sets of 10, right? It has everything to do with the prescriptive dose that you put on somebody 3 sets of 10. That can be a very different experience when,
Yes.
you know, from day to day, from session to session, from exercise to exercise. 3 sets of 10 of a thing is very different from 3 sets of 10 from another thing. So especially, you know, doing shoulder raises or, you know, there's a lot of things. And this, you know, we could go down the pathway of tempo and time manipulations and things of that nature, right?
Right. And so 3 sets of 10, is it a slow strength movement? Is it a high velocity movement? That's going to be more fatiguing. In plyometrics, 3 sets of 10 is not 3 sets of 10. If you do 10 standing jumps, that's 10 foot contacts on each leg. If you do a standing triple jump, that's 2 foot contacts per repetition. So 3 sets of 10 is not 3 sets of 10 in every scenario. And 3 sets of 10 is not the same effect of fatigue in every scenario. So again, we go back. This is the art. Are you training power? Are you training speed? Are you training strength? What are you training? They have different effects, and then it's going to have an effect on your prescription of volume.
Mm-hmm.
Higher velocity, more fatiguing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's I think we've got time maybe for 1 or 2 more questions. If anybody has anything, please just go ahead and unmute yourself, or Oh, did somebody say something?
Yeah,
I was
Charles. Oh, go ahead. Charles also tried to, but it looks like he froze. So you go first, and then Charles.
Got it. I was just typing out a question, but it's probably easier to ask. This could be for a totally different discussion too. But so we train the quad heavy in isolation because if we just tried to do heavy multi-joint exercise, then it allows room for overcompensations. Does that happen with the shoulder? So if we're training heavy multi-joint presses, does that allow for overcompensation for somebody to not use as much of their cuff?
I don't think so. I think the problem is I go back to volume. I think it's deviation from good technique, because I think if you look at muscle fibers, right, you have slow twitch, intermediate twitch, and your fast twitch, your 2Xs. The way to recruit your 2Xs is one of 2 ways. Through fatigue, like we do with blood flow restriction, which is a light load, right? But it feels heavy because we've excessively fatigued the muscles, right? So that load is heavy at the end only due to fatigue, right? And so we've recruited all these muscle fibers in that scenario. Or I can recruit the muscle fiber through velocity or a heavy load, which is usually 90% one's capacity or better. But if I'm at that heavy load, I've got to have low volumes. And if I hit it right, heavy load with low volume, I should be able to recruit those muscle fibers, not induce excessive fatigue, and not affect technique, right? Sets of 3s or less, things like that. If I'm trying to do sets of 10 with 85, 90%, it's never going to happen. That's part of my concern with CrossFit. We had that CrossFit discussion, just the high volume. I'm just so concerned with high volume activities inducing excessive fatigue and the inability to recover for the next treatment session. And so heavy loads are okay as long as an appropriate prescription of volume with it that doesn't cause excessive fatigue or deviation from exercise technique.
Go ahead, Charlie.
So I've got a quick question about assessment. Rob, what is your process for kind of determining what the deficit is for your patients? I kind of like look at things sometimes as hey, you have a load tolerance deficit, or you have a work capacity deficit, or you have a force production, like a strength deficit, right? Or you can't handle the speeds that we're applying or that you're applying with your activities. And then I structure my rehab plan and my training plan to kind of match those qualities that they need, right? And that's a little bit along the lines of Vermeil's hierarchy, right? Starting on work capacity, building strength upon that, and going from there. I'm just wondering what your approach is in assessing these things and finding the specific deficit for your patient.
Sure. So if they've had surgery, it's all the above, right? If they had surgery, they probably would cross the board. All right. So in our return to play testing, mimics Vermeil's hierarchy. So when you think of the example I gave you before about the 100-meter sprint and looking at it in reverse, so they come in, they have to show us a good amount of mobility. We like to have them overhead squat. Like, let's just say someone non-surgical comes in with a certain thing. So we'll look at stuff in isolation. We absolutely do. And then we look at joints together. So let's just say something like an overhead squat for their mobility. Then we'll have them take the overhead squat and see if they can press a dowel or a light dumbbell, light barbell. They can't do this over their head in a deep squat position 3 or 4 times because that shows me stability. And they usually can't do that. They fall over or they lose their balance. Then you decide, top down, bottom up. I'm not going to tell you what test to use. You decide. You're going to use the strength test. If they can pass the strength test, then you move to power. Since power is strength plus velocity, well, if they can't produce force, how are they going to produce force quickly? So if they're not strong enough, I know that's where I have to work and I don't worry about the rest. And we go down the line. We have a strength test, we have a power test or explosive, we have an elastic test, right? And then we have a speed or change of direction test. And we actually observe what they're doing. If they go through the whole scenario decently, then we'll pick more specifics what we need to work on. But if they fail a category, then that category, the categories we know we have to place emphasis on. Now, if they don't squat well, is it a mobility problem, a work capacity, whatever it may be? Again, I hate to be general, but we got to look at what's in front of you. And so that's how we break it down: strength test, power test, elastic test, speed test, change of direction test. If they can, and generally they can't go across the board. Where they fail is where they need to work on. Just like the hierarchy.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Jeffrey. He's asking, is there a good program to monitor workloads besides a pen and paper or Excel, or a program to create periodization programs with?
Yeah, periodization is tough in rehab because you're not dealing with a totally deconditioned athlete, right? You're dealing with inflammation, injury, at times noxious stimulus like pain, etc., and then deconditioning as well. Now, with that said, I do believe there's a period of time, and this is where we try to correlate the hierarchy with the healing continuum. We spoke about the shoulder. To me, as long as there's no contraindications, okay? I don't care if someone had a labral repair, a Tommy John, or a cuff repair. There's a point in time where healed is healed, and we have to work with a deconditioned athlete. And therefore, we start with strength levels in unison, multi-joint strength exercises, and progress through the hierarchy. Because there's literally, with appropriate loading and programming, there should be no concern for injury. Healed is healed. But until you get to that point, then it's very hard to periodize or anything like that because you're not in a normal quote unquote situation. You have deficits, noxious stimuli, and other factors that are going to affect training period to training period. You know, I'll give you an example. I've had 2 ACL patella fractures in my life. Central third patella tendon. One guy at 6 weeks post-op decided to jump down from the fence, hyperflex, drove his knee forward, fractured his patella. My periodized program would have been shot then. What am I going to do? Another guy was fixing the back of his shoe in a chair. His heel came out, fell off the chair, hyperflex, high velocity, knee went forward, fractured his patella. Things happen, right? Sometimes you're off. I do not have 1,000 batting average. I promise you. You know, you think you did something okay, person comes in the next day, they were sore as hell. And you got to make those adaptations on the fly sometimes. So periodization and rehab to me, it's tough. It's not impossible, it's tough. Until they get to when they're healed. Healed is healed, then it's a little bit easier. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's, I mean, again, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think this, Rob, I mean, I think this is something that down the road, we will look forward to having you back on and maybe dive into those areas specifically about how you're manipulating some of these variables in specific cases. And there's so much that we can talk about, but I think this starts the conversation. And maybe even we have a conversation in the future. We'll kind of pull the room about Vermeil's hierarchy, just kind of devote our attention to that, because I think, to your point, it's such a valuable concept because you can see it and it makes logical sense. And especially the way that you put it with the runner, where you can see this kind of logical progression and it's very linear. It goes forward and backwards, and you can tell that, you know, if you don't have A, you can't have B, you can't have C, and so on. And so again, I think this has been super valuable, at least from, you know, speaking personally, to get some of that context into some of these areas. And so before we get out of here, I'm going to kind of open it up to you, Rob, for any kind of last words. But thank you. This has been fantastic. Yeah.
If I give you a plug, if I may, all right?
Yeah.
So 2 of my good friends, Johnny Parker and Al Miller and myself, wrote a book called The System. Periodization for the American Strength Coach. If you want to look at Vermeil's hierarchy and how I plan stuff, how we do stuff, buy the book, The System. Now, with that said, Johnny and Al are retired on a fixed income. I'm working. John and Al get all the proceeds. I don't get a penny because I'm still working. So I told them that's the way it's going to work. So I have a plug for a book that I don't make any money on. So just so you know that, all right? So if you want to know how to, well, the way I view it and we view it, the book's called The System, all right? And you could, if you want to purchase it, you can.
Yeah.
And then
we'll put a link up. Yeah, we'll put a link up as well too, Rob.
And my email is my name, R. Panariello, P as in Peter, Anariello. It's on the you know, the format of the chat room at professionalpt.com. Feel free to email me. I just ask you give me 24 hours. I promise I'll get back to you. I just sometimes a little busier than others. But, you know, if I could help listen, I've had so many people that I can't even name help me through my career. Like I said, I've been doing this 40 years. And some people, like a guy like Al Vermeil, who took me under his wing. To honor these people, I owe it to them to give back. And so I will help anybody I can, just as I know anybody in this chat room will. So just give me the time to get back to you, but feel free to email me. And if you buy the book, you're helping Johnny and Al. Okay.
Thanks again, Rob. This has been fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, so this has been recorded. We'll post the recording on the Mobilize website, and so we'll have access to this as you need and want to review it. And then any questions, if you have anything that pops up, obviously you can email Rob specifically, or you can go through Shelby Miller, send your questions, and then we'll try to link everybody up and kind of develop this a bit further. But thank you, everybody, again. Rob, just outstanding, man. It's nothing but a pleasure.
And everyone, thank you for taking the time out of your evening. I'm sure there's better things you could have done, but it's appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.